Hi, and welcome to the third episode of the Improvisational Essay Driving Podcast. This is Lenny, aka Tribrix, and today we're going to discuss a most unlikely success. And before that, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping, as I like to do. Firstly, what I have been watching, which is, I was just watching the film version of Rent on DVD and listening to the director's commentary. And it was really interesting to hear the point of view of some of the people who were there when the play was still being developed off Broadway, and then eventually brought to Broadway. I hadn't realized that so many people from the original production were involved in the film, and I enjoyed hearing their perspectives on helping develop the play with Mr. Larson before his demise around the time that the play opened on Broadway. I've always liked the play a lot. It certainly spoke to me at the time that it came out. Although I didn't see it right away, it actually been out a couple of years before I eventually saw it. But I had the soundtrack as soon as it was released, and so I was familiar with the music before I saw the show for the first time. And lately I've been listening to the first three albums by the rock band Boston. So I recently recorded my vinyl copies to tape. And it's funny about those albums because it almost seems like, regardless of how much I listen to them, that I can't overplay them for my own taste. Like, I just never get tired of listening to them. And when I was in junior high school and we were playing those records so often, we were fairly convinced that we were going to burn ourselves out on them. And I'm surprised. Here it is so many years later, and it still hasn't happened. I still enjoy listening to those. It's kind of like Saint-Saëns Organ Symphony No. 3, which is the piece of classical music that I am most likely to be listening to if I'm listening to classical. And that's been true for almost 20 years. That's my go-to classical piece if I'm in the mood to listen to some classical. But anyway, so now we'll get on to the main topic at hand today, which, again, I'm calling a most unlikely success. And what I want to discuss today is the lowly Phillips compact cassette, which you probably know as the audio cassette, a format that was invented in the 60s for doing dictation. So you would record your letters or thoughts or whatever onto one of these cassettes, and then your secretary or stenographer or whomever you had hired would type out everything you had spoken into the cassette, so you would have it in a physical written form. So how did this little dictation device turn into the most popular music format of the 80s? And that story is actually what got me going on this, because I hadn't realized kind of how unlikely it was that the compact cassette would ever become a music format. And it seems to me, from what I can glean, and again, I produce these essays without any notes or scripts, as you can tell by the uncomfortable pauses occasionally. But as best I can tell, the main reason that this ever got taken seriously as an audio format was because of the Nakamichi Corporation. And in case you're not familiar with Nakamichi, they are kind of like the Ampex of Japan. And then some of you might be saying, well, who's Ampex? I've never heard of Ampex. And Ampex was a corporation dedicated to magnetic recording technology that was started after World War II, and famous because I think it was Bing Crosby, but it might have been Fred Astaire, but I think it was Bing Crosby, had was one of the original backers of Ampex, and he had gotten involved because he was very interested in developing the technology for recording tape for his, his audio recordings. He was a performer, musical performer, and so he had an interest in seeing this technology develop. Now, wire recording had been around since I think the 30s, and so a piece of wire was spun onto spools and then pulled over a recording / playback head. And the thing about wire recording was that it was not very good. It was very low fidelity. There was a lot of surface noise. It was very hard to understand the recordings. The advantage that it had over the other technology at the time, which was disc recording, was that you could reuse the wire. So you could record something on the wire and then erase it and, record something new on it later. But it certainly wasn't quality enough for use in music recording. And I think it was the Germans around the time of World War II who first moved away from wire and towards tape. I think they were using magnetic particles sprinkled on acetate. Again, I'm doing this without any notes and without the internet because I'm driving. I can't even look these things up to make sure that I'm presenting them accurately. But this is the knowledge to the best of my recollection from having looked at this a lot of times over the years. And so they had moved away from the wire and towards, these magnetic particles on acetate, which would have yielded much better results, and did yield better results. And so after the war, this was brought to the attention of, I think it was Bing Crosby, but it could have been Fred Astaire. It'll be in the notes below what the correct, who the correct person was. Joined together with some other people to form the Ampex Corporation to further develop magnetic recording technology. And so Ampex was always a heavily research-oriented firm. And they did eventually come up with some standards for tape recording that really elevated the art and made tape recording acceptable for music and broadcast use. Later, I think it was also in the 60s, Ampex developed the very first videotape recorder, which was quite an achievement. Before that, video was recorded on film using a device, I think it was called a telecine, which would allow you to record television shows onto film. And if you've ever watched any old TV shows from the 50s, you'll notice that it is, a video signal that has been recorded on film and then converted back into video. And that extra film step yields some results that are not altogether desirable. So the development of videotape was wonderful because then you could eliminate a whole generation and format change when trying to record television shows. But Ampex was very famous. I'm old enough that the very first blank cassette I ever bought was an Ampex brand blank cassette. And I don't remember seeing them for a very long time. But if I ever came across one today at a yard sale, I would definitely pick it up just to have that little bit of Ampex history. So we've delved a little bit into magnetic recording history, but haven't really got to the compact cassette yet. But trust me, we're getting there. So up until the early 70s, the main way that tape was used with the recording and playback of music was using reel-to-reel decks. And reel-to-reels traditionally had a reel of tape about that big, and there would be two of them spinning in unison, and the tape would go off of one, over the tape head, and then back up to the other. And like the compact cassette later, you could flip the tape over and play the other side, as it were, so that for whatever length of tape you had, you would have twice that amount of recording time. And this prevented you from having to rewind the tape when it was finished. You know, if you filled up your reel-to-reel tape, you could play one side completely and then flip it over and play the other side completely. And there'd be no need to rewind the tape each time after use. This was very efficient. If any of you remember having a VCR, when you got to the end of that tape, you did have to rewind it to watch it again. You could not flip it over and play the other side. Then you had the dedicated VHS tape rewinders, which I always had one of those because they actually tended to do a better job of rewinding than my VCR did, getting the tape on the spools more evenly, it seems, and being a little faster. But I digress. So you had reel-to-reel tape, which offered true high fidelity, and it was recordable and re-recordable. My father had a nice collection of reel-to-reel tapes that he would drag out now and again, especially at Christmas time. And depending on what speed you set them on, these things could go for hours, and that is actually how his were set up, to play back for hours. And despite these slower recording times, the tape was so thick that you actually got really nice fidelity even on these really long recordings. And at the time, again, we're talking about the early 70s, no one imagined that you could do anything high fidelity with the compact cassette because the tape was so thin compared to reel-to-reel tape. I mean, it was half the width. However, the Nakamichi Corporation saw potential in the compact cassette, and at the Consumer Electronics Show, I think it was 1971, they were ready to demonstrate how compact cassettes could be used for high fidelity music. And so they set up a little A/B test with the Nakamichi compact cassette tape recorder right next to a state-of-the-art reel-to-reel recorder, and demonstrated by switching back and forth from one to the other that you could achieve really high fidelity on a compact cassette, blowing people's minds, I might add. Nobody could have imagined that this was possible. Now, I was not there. I was but an extremely young child at that time, and so I don't know for sure, but I kind of want to think that Nakamichi cheated just a little bit, because I'm going to guess that the reel-to-reel was using a standard Type 1 iron oxide tape, and that the Nakamichi compact cassette deck was using a Type 2 chrome tape. And so cheating a little bit to achieve their results of parity with reel-to-reel. And I say cheating a little bit because, if they had had a chrome Type 2 tape on the reel-to-reel deck, I think that the better performance of the reel-to-reel would have been more stark. But I can't say any of that for sure. I mean, Nakamichi, despite me thinking that they probably cheated a little bit, they also, because their decks were so well designed, they might have been able to achieve those results even using a Type 1 tape. I mean, I've certainly made some really good Type 1 tape recordings before. But, you know, given a choice, I will always record on a Type 2 chrome tape rather than an iron oxide Type 1 tape, because you get much greater fidelity and depth, and it just sounds more like the source if you use the higher grade tape. But anyway, that's just a, you know, conjecture on my part about, you know, how I think Nakamichi may have cheated a little bit in that first demonstration. But when you think about it, that was 1971, and the cassette tape didn't come to dominate until the 80s. And so you got to think, like, so what happened in between? And I think what happened in between was that Sony developed the Walkman, which was the small portable cassette player with stereo headphones. And for those of you too young to remember, you can't imagine how absolutely revolutionary the Walkman was, that, you know, you could have this high fidelity portable stereo system that fit on your hip. It was unbelievable. And, you know, it was kind of, you know, people thought it was a little strange to be wearing a cassette player on your body like that. And when I got my first Walkman, which was not a Walkman, it was a generic stereo cassette player with headphones. It was modeled after the Walkman very closely, including the orange foam on the headphones. But when I got my first one, which I got for my birthday one year, you know, we were getting ready to go to the video arcades to go play some games, and I wanted to wear it, and my parents were like, "Why would you wear that? Wouldn't that look kind of strange?" And I was thinking, like, wow, they really don't get what this is about. Which, you know, just shows a little bit of the generation gap there. I had certainly seen people wearing them and was ready to do so, but my parents still thought it was a bit odd that you would wear a cassette deck on your waist. And you know, the thing I have to wonder though is, like, what did they think I wanted it for if I wasn't going to wear it out and about? You know, was it just like a keeping up with the Joneses kind of thing? Or, you know, what did they think I had in mind? Of course, it did come in useful in other ways that didn't involve wearing it on one's hip. Taking it to school to listen to music during lunch. Listening to my own music in the back seat of the station wagon on long trips. Similarly, taking it with me on road trips at school when the soccer team would be playing and we would have an away game. I often listened to it on the bus that way. So there were times that I was listening to it and not wearing it on my hip. But certainly that first day I wanted to, and my parents thought it was a little strange. But yeah, so I think Nakamichi paved the way for the success of the cassette by demonstrating that you could record high fidelity audio on a cassette. But Sony really sealed the deal with the development of the cassette Walkman, showing people that you could take music with you wherever you wanted to go and listen to it anywhere, and it would sound great. And subsequently helped Apple to sell a lot of iPods. I'm kidding, but only partially kidding. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this little look back at the Phillips compact cassette, a most unlikely success in music history, as it started, as I explained, as a dictation format for recording just voice into mono, and later became the most popular format for music in the 80s. Please take care, enjoy your week, and hopefully I'll see you next Wednesday. Bye.